Okay, in the last tutorial, we created this bottle, which, right, I actually created ahead of time, but gave you some sense of what that's like. And then with the idea that this is going to be an asset for a 3D game, and we want to be able to have it set to different levels of detail as well, right? This is going to be our highest resolution mesh. And the reason that I'm keeping it as low res as this is just because it made it a lot easier to show UV unwrapping and what exactly was going on with that process. So we've UV unwrapped this, and we're going to go to the next step, which is going to be taking this model and remeshing it to make it have fewer polygons and really prepare it to both have the level of detail. So the closer it is to the camera, the higher the resolution the mesh is. The further away from it, the camera it is, the lower that mesh resolution is. And one of the things we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do a process that really helps us preserve the UVs that we've already made, so we don't have to redo the UVs for every iteration of the object that we're going to do. And there's two tools that we can use to reduce polygon mesh counts, and we're going to look at the differences between those two and the one that we'll actually want to use. But first, we need to make one more edit to the UV map over here. And that's just this strip here. This is going to be our cork. And because you might want it to actually be like a cork texture, it would be useful if it was the same diameter as the rest of the bottle, right? So we'd have about the same amount of space to use to create this. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to move things around one more time and expand this, because this automatically made this a little bit smaller than we would potentially like it to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have this selected, make sure I have my UVs selected, make sure I'm in polygon mode. There we go. And now I'm going to select these different islands, and I'm going to move some of these down out of the way a little bit, just so that I have a bit more space to expand this. And let's see here, and all I'm doing is double clicking and dragging these down. I could even pull these off this main tile for the time being, just to get them out of the way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and double click on this section. I'm going to bring it close to the original. And then I'm going to use my scale tool. And I might go ahead and zoom in a bit more and even shrink some of these other windows just a little bit, so I can actually have a little bit more real estate to work with. I'm going to come to the corner here. I'm going to click and drag, and you can see very quickly this actually scales pretty fast. But it looks like I can make it right about the same length. It means I may need to scale down my other assets, which is actually good, right? I don't need the bottom of the bottle to be this massive. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this island, bring it up here, and go ahead and scale this one down, right? So it fits, and you can see I'm over the edge a little bit. So oops. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this over and center it a bit more. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click on this one and not scale it up. I am going to move it, but I may need to zoom in just a touch more to do that. There we go. Now I can move this up here. And I could scale this up if I wanted to a little bit, so it more closely matches the top half there. And, it doesn't really matter, really. And if I wanted to, this top cap here, we could go ahead and make this a little bigger too, right? These are changes we can make, and it's going to be based on the object you're making and where you need these materials to be. I'm not too worried about this strip, right? That's just this edge here, and it's not the end of the world that it's not about the same size. Okay, so I've made those few changes. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Oh yeah, and I copied this into another folder, so I'm just going to call this, we'll just call this bottle final UVs. And I don't know why my computer is not letting me do what I want it to do. So I'm going to save this, and I don't need caps lock on, but I'm going to call this final UV. I should probably say, let's just say bottle final UVs. Okay, so I've saved that. Okay, so we've got our bottle, we've got our finalized mesh. We're happy with where all of our UV islands are. Now it's time to figure out, how are we going to put texture on this? How are we going to paint this? And the way that we're going to do that is by using the paint commands. Now, there's another tutorial I covered that I already covered, how to use the basics of paint and drop a logo on an object, and you can take a look at those. But we're just going to do this pretty quickly, and we're just going to make something really, really dumb. But so we can see if our mesh, and when we make the changes and reduce our polygon counts, if we end up having warping happen on the surface or not. So we're going to go to paint, the paint layout over here. And once we go there, we're going to say, okay, we've got our object in the scene. Now I'm going to go ahead and select my paint setup wizard, right? I only have this one object in here. So I'm going to say next. I'm going to uncheck recalculate UVs, right? I don't want that to happen. I do want single material mode. And for our purposes, we are just going to create something in the color channel. And again, we'll set this to 2048 by 2048. So we have a decent amount of resolution for this tutorial. We're going to click finish. All right. And now we should have a paintable object. Now, if I click on here, okay, great. It is painting this time. Last time I did the tutorial, for some reason it wasn't. And well, all I did was I switched over here, painted over here, and then came back over to this view and I was able to paint. Okay, so now I'm able to paint on this surface. And so we're going to go ahead and just make this look like a wine bottle, sort of. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to my layers. I have this background layer. I am going to click on my fill layer button, and you'll see automatically it fills it with whatever solid color I've got there. I want this to be, right, we're making a wine bottle. Let's make it kind of greenish and maybe make this color a little bit darker. And then we can click on that button again, right? And it should make this like a dark green bottle. Fantastic. And you'll see it covered the entire surface of the object. Now, if I go to my UV texture editor, this is looking pretty dark. Maybe I'll make the green a little bit brighter. Let's go ahead and change this color. We'll just go up a little bit somewhere in here. And so now I can go ahead and fill layer again and just brighten it up. So I want to go to my UV editor, and remember, all of the stuff over here on this side of the image is basically all, what am I trying to say? Everything over here is what we want to color, right? This is going to be our bottle, but all of this is essentially the cap. So I'm going to use my selection tool. I'm going to come off here over the side edge. I'm going to scroll down, and I want to make sure, right, I've selected everything over here, but I want you to note what happens, right? Because these things are so close to the edge, right, it's actually selecting onto the other side of the tile, which isn't what we want to do. So we may need to do a couple selections, or we might need to go really close to that edge and see, and then maybe finish up by painting a little bit on the side there. So I'm going to select all of this. And this time I do want to make sure on layers, I do have this new layer selected. And instead of coloring the entire layer, what I need to do this time is I need to change this from fill layer to fill bitmap. And then I want to change to a color that I want. And in our case, let's do like something like it's going to be like a gold foil on there. And again, we're doing really simple flat colors with this. But if I click in there, right, it's going to do the whole thing. I might want this to be a little warmer even. And so I'll just click on it again. Maybe that's a little too dark, but it doesn't really matter. So now if I go back to my view, right, you can see that I've got, right, that portion of my model colored, right? And in this case, right, it'd be great to actually have a little bit of the top of the bottle selected as well. So let's go back to our view. In this case, if we use the selection tool, we can just click once to get rid of the existing selection. And then I believe this is the top of the bottle here. The only way we'll really be able to tell is by actually creating this selection. And remember, we want to just go to the edge so we don't go over it. Although really we could paint some of this gold and that'd be fine. I'm going to go back to view, and you can see, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. I'm like 1 pixel off there, but that should be fine because I can paint that in just a second. So we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to go back to our texture editor. We could actually probably fill it here. At this point, I can probably just go in here and click on this, and it should fill all the way around. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to deselect that because otherwise if I continue painting, it's going to miss it. So I'm going to deselect it. I'm going to use my paintbrush, and my paintbrush should already be set to this solid color. Now, One of the issues here is that this is a pretty small brush size, so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And you can kind of see how big that gets. And we're just going to go ahead and paint around the spot here that's missing. Right? We could have selected that and done a better job, but you know, not the end of the world. I have noticed that Cinema does like to crash in paint mode, so it's always good when you've made a big change to save and say, yes, you do want to save those textures as well, otherwise they will be gone. Okay. So now we've got these two basic things. We could, right, actually paint this more of a tan color. You can do that if you want to, but again, we're trying to make this a pretty simple bottle. And so then the other thing we're going to do is we want to create a label on the side here. And so one of the ways that I can do that is I can come down here and I can just sort of click and drag and create a selection area on the side of this bottle. Now, I want you to note that when I'm doing this in perspective view, that label's a little bit warped. So I'm going to deselect that because what's happening is it's drawing it square to the screen, not square to the bottle. So the projection is weird. So if I go to my side view and do the same thing, you'll see that it's actually aligning with this grid. Now, when I do that, it disappears in this view. If I pop back into this other view, my view at first was strange, right? There was some weirdness there. And what happens is occasionally with this, you get these redraw errors. And so if that happens, you can go to view and redraw or hit the letter A, and then it will fix that for you. Okay, so now I've got my label here. Let's choose a different color for our label. I'm going to make it more white just so that the colors that I choose to use next show up better on it. So I'm going to make it a whitish label. I'm going to use my fill again, and I'm just going to fill that section there, right? So now I've got a label and everything else is going on. So I'm going to go back to my editor. And I want you to see that, right, currently, right, we've been using the same layer, right? This layer here has all our details on it. That's just our bottle. And so now we could create a new layer if we want to be able to do some drawing on top of this. Or we could experiment with using this, the text tool as well. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a smiley face on here, though, to make life easier. So I'm going to pull this down, just make it black, and I'm drawing this sideways, but right, I'm just going to make a little smiley face. This is a very crappy bottle of wine, but we've got, maybe he's got, I don't know what that is. We're going to undo that. All right, here we go. Let's put his tongue out like this. Okay, beautiful. This is the most beautiful artwork we've ever made. I'm going to save it again. I want to say yes. I want to save the changes to the texture. I'm going to go to my view. Oh, and it's upside down. Even better, right? So this is one of the things to note with UVs is like, which direction are they facing? In my case, they are upside down. Now, I might be able to actually use this tool to rotate this, right? So if I rotate this 180 degrees, right, now I can go ahead and come back here and my label is in the correct orientation, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this one more time and it's going to ask again. I'm going to say yes. Okay, so now I've got my beautiful bottle, right? I am ready to go. Everything's looking good. I'm happy with this. I forgot that the bottom was part of this as well when I did that. So the bottom's gold, but that doesn't matter. That's actually going to be helpful for us to see how this maps when we go to the next step. Okay, so I'm saving it one more time. We've got our bottle ready. We've got a texture. Let's go ahead and go back to standard mode. Okay, so now we've got our painted surface and we're ready to start reducing the number of polygons. Now, there are two ways that we can reduce polygons efficiently and somewhat cleanly in Cinema4d, and that is to use two generators. There's one that's Polygon Reduction, and there's another one that is Remesh, right? They're kind of right next to each other here. And they have similar purposes. They do different things. And Polygon Reduction in this case has one feature that for what we're going to be doing makes it a much stronger choice. So the next step is I just want to show you some of the differences really quick between the two with some of the base settings. So I'm going to take my default settings object, just my bottle, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to copy and paste that. So I have 2 copies. I'm going to make one a child of remesh. I'm going to make the other one a child of polygon reduction. And then I'm going to select the remesh. I'm going to use my move tool, which it looks like I'm still in painting mode for some reason. I'm not sure why my tools didn't update. Oh, probably because I'm still in 3D paint mode, which is invisible here. So I'm going to go to model mode. There we go. Now I've got, move tools, and I'm going to, again, take the remesh. I'm going to pull it over. And the reason I'm leaving the polygon reduction in the center is because that's the one we're actually going to be using. But I just want you to see some of the differences here. So one of the major differences that causes problems, well, first, polygon reduction looks terrible right now, and remesh looks pretty good. If I select the remesh object here, you'll see that my mesh density is set to 100%. So the reason this looks good is because it's the exact same number of polygons as the base mesh. If I was to set this down to, say, 50%, that's going to reduce the number of polygons on here. And it is going to, if I go to show lines, you can see this is fewer polygons. If I uncheck this, it's more polygons, fewer polygons, And so that's great and all. It's reduced the polygons. It's done a pretty clean job. Now let's look at polygon reduction. If I select this, you'll see right now its reduction strength is 90%. That means it's removing 90% of the polygons. Let's go down and set this to 50% so they're even. And I want you to see that one of the major differences to start with is that polygon reduction actually turns these into triangles rather than quads. Other than that, it does a pretty similar job in terms of how it details things. You can see that actually, if I look here, there's a little less detail and more rounding on this edge, whereas this maintains those edges a little bit better, And then there's another setting that makes a big difference. And we're going to actually talk about why triangles are also better for 3D software soon. But one other setting that makes a big difference is if I click on my remesh and I go to UV edit, look what it's done to the UVs that we took all of our time and energy to unwrap, It's smeared things all over the place. And this can be really problematic because it can lead to, one, some artifacts and things because of these edges that are stuck together and stretched across this other surface. And 2, these aren't uniform anymore, They're wobbly. They're not quite in the same place. So if I use this mesh and apply the same material to it, it's not going to be quite in the same place. And so if I have these models swapping out in this level of detail, that's kind of the goal of this, is that we're going to create 4 levels of detail or however many levels of detail, so that as it gets further from the camera or closer to the camera, it swaps out for a higher resolution or lower resolution model. But we don't want this beautiful wine bottle label to be warping and changing with each iteration of that change. It's going to lead to a visual artifact when we flip and when we switch between the 2 different models. And that's what we're trying to stop from happening as much as possible. So, however, polygon reduction, if I select that, one of the options here is preserve UV boundaries. If I check mark that, I don't see any change here, and I actually can't see the UVs. But if I go ahead and right click on this object and I go down to connect objects, what it does is it's basically, connect objects is going to make this one object. And you'll see that it actually preserves the exact shape of all of my polygons with a slight change here because of how it rendered things. But everything is in exactly the same place. The boundaries are the same. So I'm not going to have any crazy change to my material when I switch to a different bottle resolution. So this is fantastic. A couple of other things, in our case, this bottle, the default bottle, is pretty low polygon, Even at my highest density mesh, it's pretty much every piece of hardware you would want to use could handle this. There's absolutely no need to really reduce it. I mean, in fact, I should probably have more polygons and then reduce from there to get down to about the number of polygons that are on the surface of the original object. So in our case, right, this is just, again, to show things and show how this works. And the real part that polygon reduction helps on is if you've sculpted something or if you have some really high density mesh, right? If I actually wanted this bottle to not be faceted, if I wanted it to be incredibly smooth, then using polygon reduction and specifically the triangle reduction is going to give me a really clean, rounded, smooth finish with as few polygons as possible before it starts to degrade in quality. And right, with the 90% reduction, we saw that degradation in quality of the original object, right? It clearly was not as good as it had been, and you could see the artifacts on the surface, right? And so when you have millions of polygons, the issue with that is not only would it just wreck a game engine, or if you're trying to render that in real time every single frame, along with other things going on in the world. But two, most 3D gaming engines, objects have a maximum number of vertices that they can handle. And that maximum number is 65,535. And Unity, I don't think, will even let you import objects if they have more than that number of polygons, right? And so you have to reduce things down to something that's manageable in order to bring any really detailed assets into a game engine at all, not only just for the health of your game and making it not stutter, but also because it has a hard limit. And for those of you nerds out there, that hard limit happens to be the maximum size of a 16-bit integer value, which is the maximum size that is sort of like a standard for game engines. And it means that hardware from phones to everything else can hold all of those values. Whereas if you were to make it a 32-bit value or something like that, you could get a lot more polygons in there, but then there'd be issues of compatibility, and you'd have to be making a version of the game that's a higher resolution and the game version that's lower, and you get into a lot of problems there, right? This makes it a lot more portable to different systems because everyone knows to use a 16-bit unsigned integer value. Okay. So that's the nerdy part. All right, so we've got this bottle. We're going to use this. Remesher is fantastic. There's a lot of features we'll look at in other tutorials and ways it can really help you like clean up a mesh and actually take a crazy high polygon ugly mesh and make it usable in a way where you could actually UV unwrap it and then do these other steps to clean the mesh up and use polygon reduction to reduce it further. Okay, so let's go ahead and just delete the remesh, and let's just delete this one that we created as well. And let's look at our polygon reduction. And we're going to go back to standard view. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so right at this point with my polygon reduction, I have the reduction strength set to 50%. If I set this to 0%, right, what that does is it basically isn't doing anything. You can even see that it hasn't even changed, right, these polygons at all. If I make it 1%, we might get a few more triangles. Why is this not? Weird. I don't know what just happened, but it wasn't redrawing the mesh into triangles. If that happens to you, I'm going to leave that in the tutorial because that was weird. All I did was uncheck, and check preserve 3D boundaries, and then it actually updated, right? It could have been something where if I hit the letter A on the keyboard, it might have updated as well. But at 0%, you can see I've got, right, a lot of polygons on here. It's still, right, my vertex count and my triangle count is 11,000, and my vertex count is, 5,600, right? This is a pretty low resolution bottle, right? One of the other things that you can do with remesh that you can't do with a polygon reduction is with remesh, you can actually increase the number of polygons on the surface if you need to. But oftentimes, subdivision surface works better, and then you can make that editable and then go from there. But okay, so I've got this set at 0%. Let's go ahead and make 3 copies of this, because that's all we're really going to need to show the next steps. So I've got my polygon reduction, this one. I'm going to go ahead and copy it and paste it and paste it again. So I have 3 versions. So let's say this is going to be our 0%, this one, and let's go ahead and say we want to rename this just .0. And then we'll do these as what percentage we're reducing. So let's say we want to reduce this by 25%. And then let's just make this one 75%. So there's a pretty big difference here. Okay, so we've got those 3 sets. So now we have them named accurately. So we can leave this one at 0. We're going to go ahead here and we're going to change this to, I said 25% fewer polygons. Okay. And then this one, we're going to say 75% fewer polygons. Okay. Oh, and somehow that did not enter. So 75. There we go. Make sure that this one's at 25 and this one's at 0. Okay, so we've got our different copies of our bottles. And so now what we can do is we can go ahead and let's just go ahead and say connect objects on the first one. And we're going to call this, since the name seems to not be transferring, we're going to say default settings 75. And then we'll go down to 25, right click, connect objects, and rename this default 25. And I'm using dashes now. It doesn't really matter as long as we have an easy way to see which one's which. I'm going to right click on this, connect objects, and I could do connect and delete, but in our case, right, I want to keep all of this here for the time being. And so now I've got my default settings and this will be 0. Okay, so then what I want to do is I want to create a null, and I'm going to take my polygon reductions that I'm not going to be interested in looking at any longer. I'm going to pull all of those in the null. I'm going to turn off the generator part of this, and I'm going to make the null completely invisible. Right, so then I'm going to close it up so my hierarchy looks a little bit nicer. And now that I've got that set, let's go ahead and create an LOD. So I'm going to come over here, and here's my LOD object. Right, and so I've got my LOD. And what we want to do is we want to make these 3 things children of the LOD. And so as soon as I do that, you'll notice oh, there we go. Now the texture is updated. Everything's happy. Fantastic. Okay. So now with the LOD, one of the things you'll see is if I select the object, I've got all of these different settings. Right now, it says my current level is 0 and the default setting is 75, right? This isn't exactly what I want to have happen. What I'd like is for level 0 to be the one that's closest, right? And 25 to be here, and then 75 to be the final one. So I've got these 3 different levels here. And now what should happen, if I come down here and I go to where is it? If I go to, is it under options? No, object. Okay. And I zoom in and out. Now, nothing is changing here, and that's because I'm currently, no, I'm in the right mode. Let's see what my settings are here. Okay, so you can set user LOD settings. We're just going to go down to camera distance. And what that means is that as the camera gets closer and further from this object, it should increase the number of polygons on that surface. Now, something is wrong. So something odd happened when I created these objects. I'm going to pull this out of here for a second because it still has this grid text grid, like it still has a grid. It doesn't have it didn't actually apply things when I connected it. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but right, this is not useful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the visibility of that model off and turn the visibility of my LOD off as well. Let's turn this back on. Yep. Turn that all off, right? So then I'm going to come down to my null. I'm going to turn this on. And the only object that I'm really concerned about right now is this 25%. So if I go ahead and turn off the visibility of these other 2 options here, so I just have this one selected, you'll see that this does have the triangle mesh on it. I have no idea what happened. And now if I right click and go to connect objects, right? Now, if I pull this up here and hide this as well, now this should be accurate, right? Again, I'm not quite sure what happened. And it wasn't apparent until, but it did it for like all 3 levels. So one thing to note before we go any further, right? We did fix this, but I wanted to show this too. So you may notice that when we were going through the LOD, 0 and 25 looked pretty similar. And that's because what's happening is, right, the polygon reduction is only reducing polygons where they're really, really dense. Like the surface here hasn't hit that threshold where it needs to change. So if you watch as I do polygon reduction here, right, I'm getting no changes on the bottle, neck, or anything except right here on the top. And then once I get to a little bit past 50%, somewhere in here, then things start to change more drastically, right? When I get to like 90% or 85%, right? And so that actually means I could probably even, right, depending on how happy I am with it, I could probably do a reduction, to 50% as my start if the mesh still looks good with this object. All right, so I could even maybe start here with 0 and then go from there. For our example, we're going to go ahead and leave it the way it is, where we have it at 0, 25, and 75. However, I think we have one more thing we need to fix. If I pull this 75 up, you'll see again, for some reason, this didn't actually apply the settings. I'm not quite sure why. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this visibility on, turn these two off, right? And so you can see now at 75%, and let's go ahead and make this 80% just so it's a little more chunky. So we can see differences a little bit more strongly. So, right, so this is 80% reduction. If I right click on here and I go to connect objects and then turn the visibility of this off, I should also now have something here that's a good fix. So let's change this to -25. And let's change this to -75 and then make it a child of the LOD as well. And actually make it a child. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the broken models real quick. I'm going to make this visible. I'm going to select the LOD. And now you can see, right, I'm not getting any change there. But as soon as I pop into level 2 here, I am getting a visible change, right? If I had my camera set a little bit higher up here, like if I panned over and zoomed in, you'll see that I get a pretty substantial change up top too. Now, one of the things we're trying to keep here is that the material stays the same. And from what I can tell, as we're zooming in and out, if we look at this, if we come and look at the surface, the thing that's the most important to us, and I'm popping through these, you will see that my texture does not move at all, right? So I actually have the same texture in the same place because all of my UVs are exactly, even though they're less complex polygons, if I select the UV tag for 75, you'll see everything is still more or less aligned in the same place. And so I'm getting a very similar result. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, right? So now we have a set of assets that are ready to export. So let's go ahead and export these. Now, for this, I'm going to go ahead and I could copy this into a new file or whatever, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything except what I need, which are these, right, 3 copies in this LOD. And so now, in order to export this for a format that Unity would like, I can go ahead and say File, Export, and I want to go down to FBX. And with FBX, I want to make sure I'm going to checkmark bring the material. I have found with Unity that sometimes that doesn't work, and it's totally fine. We want to bring the normals, triangulate. We don't need to do that. We've already done it. We don't have any lights, cameras, or anything else in the scene, so we don't need to worry about checking or unchecking any of that. We could bake our materials. I don't think we even need to do that because all we're using is the single color channel. But if you were using a procedural material, like say you had some noise applied here somewhere, then you would want to checkmark bake materials. In our case, this is really basic. So we don't need to bake anything. And we're just going to go ahead and hit OK. And once we do that, it's going to ask what we want it saved as. We want to save it as an FBX, and we'll hit save. Okay, so now, at least on the Mac, I'm pretty sure if I come to my LOD tutorial and I go and I find my FBX file, which in this case, it's the bottle one. You can tell I've done a few of these ahead of time. Oh, I won't even be able to, unfortunately, it doesn't actually draw it. It does draw, I think, STLs and OBJ files in the preview window, but it doesn't do FBX. So the next step will be bringing this into Unity.